Hello, welcome to another YouTube video. We have Levi back again for a review, a discussion talking about Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio. We're going to give a little bit of a summary, a little bit of our thoughts, spoiler-free, talking about what we thought, whether you should read it if you're interested in science fiction and fantasy, and then we'll get to some more deeper discussion on the book itself and just going into the reading the series as a whole. I think we'll plan to do the rest of the series. The seventh book comes out this November. So, yeah, that's the plan. Levi, thanks for coming on.
Sure thing. I just now saw your pod racing back there.
Yeah.
Now that's pod racing.
It is pod racing, yeah. Always got to have the Legos and the books. I feel like they just go together really well.
Yeah, they really make sure people know you're a nerd. So,
yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good. There's some things that maybe I had issues with, but overall, I don't really have the sense that I would have done something vastly different if I was writing it myself.
Oh yeah.
I kind of think just it made sense for this book. I maybe would have written a different book, but if this, and what I mean by that is like if this was my formula, I don't know that I would have changed a whole lot. Whereas some books I read and I go, oh, this is really good for 80% of it, but I would change a little bit. Whereas I think for what this was, I think it's pretty solid.
That's interesting. I don't usually read books thinking about how I would have written them.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just write my own original.
Well, I'm not saying I try to plagiarize.
I know. But that being said, I thought it was good, and I'll say some positive things about it. But overall, it's I think my biggest complaint, and we'll get to this later, is that it's more of a first chapter, and I know that can be the case for a lot of series these days, where it's the understanding is that you got to read the rest of the series if you want to see where the story goes. But I think that the best sort of trilogies, especially the first entry in it, or any series really, can stand on its own. It doesn't mean that you have to retcon something to continue on with in the second or third entry or anything like that. It just means that whatever the story that it was telling, there needs to be some sort of closure to it by the end of it. And this one felt very thin.
Like setup, just like a setup book.
Yeah.
Yeah. In like you're looking for more of Indiana Jones, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, not really intending to make a series. The movie ends, that's the end of it. Or even like A New Hope, Star Wars, where it's, beginning, middle, end, ends. Maybe there's more to the story. Mm-hmm. And then they make more. Is that kind of what you're saying? You want each entry to be its own standalone kind of thing?
Yeah, to a sense. But even beyond that, like if you look at we were talking earlier about The Lord of the Rings. His intention was that it would be one novel,
yeah.
Right? But even with it being 3 different entries, and that being the way that readers experience it, usually, you have the Fellowship of the Ring, and it is its own standalone story. It sets up the whole trilogy, and it starts things that it doesn't finish in that book, especially when things having to do with the ring and the Frodo's goal to take it to Mordor. But the book is about how did this fellowship come around? Or, how did hobbits end up as a part of it? We get that part in the beginning, and the fellowship gets started, and we see the end of the fellowship. Really, they're never all together again until the very end. And so the Fellowship of the Ring, that's the name of the book, starts and ends within the book. And that's makes sense for why that entry into this otherwise much bigger story ends right there. Whereas with the Empire of Silence, there is a reason why it ends right here, but there isn't that thematic reason. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that was begun at the beginning of the book that now has finished at the end of it, where you could say that it is in itself its own novel outside from the series. I don't think it is. And if it is, it's very thin. Most of this is chapter 1 of the Sun Eater, and only a little bit is its own thing. And even the title itself, reading the book and knowing what it means, what it's talking about, is more of this is what the series is going to be about.
Yes.
Encompassing everything that happens in this book. In fact, I imagine that the other books are probably going to have more to do with the thing being referenced in this title than this book itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It does feel very much like a setup kind of book, getting us into the world, establishing characters that we'll see again and again. And there's moments in that And before we get into spoilers or anything, we can just talk about characters and pace and setting and some of those things. But there's moments where he mentions a character as this kind of historic or epic character that we'll see later on. The first time I met this character, I didn't realize who they would become, and that kind of language. And so there's this sense that, this is our introduction to these characters, which almost in a way would maybe be more effective as like a prequel story where you've already have the established characters and then you go back and it's. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that would. I'm not a huge prequel fan. Like, just enjoy. I think if you can start your story where it starts, that's the best way to do it. But having said all that, plots. What were your thoughts? What would you rate it? You don't have to give a specific number rating, but
sure, yeah, and that is basically my review of the plot because it does. Yeah. I think I compared it to the Odyssey, where it feels like he's Odysseus and he's just getting thrown across the Great Black Sea, I think is what they call it in the book. And so there really isn't any through line for the plot. I mean, really, it's him fighting other people's wants for his life. He keeps finding himself underneath somebody else's thumb and trying to fight his way out. And so that's a lot like Odysseus, trying to fight his way out of the thumb, under the shadow of monsters and terrible creatures and things like that, all in a quest to get back to Penelope. And in this book, the Penelope is a lot more vague. It's just kind of freedom, which could work. But because we know that there's an ultimate end to this series, and it is set up through the narration, which we'll get to later. Yeah. To me, it feels a little weak for that reason.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, plot wise, it almost doesn't have a plot. It's just kind of. It is an Odyssey kind of story, just going from this thing to that thing. Yeah. And there isn't, maybe the Odyssey you have, like you said, the Penelope, kind of the MacGuffin thing to chase. Mm-hmm. There's this thing that we have to get to. And even, the comparisons, and we'll do more about comparisons in a little bit, but people talk about The Name of the Wind. And you mentioned this before we started recording, but he gets attacked by the evil characters at the beginning of the story in Name of the Wind. And that sort of sets up this, I've got to get good to be able to defeat them, to have this revenge on these characters again. And so there's that little MacGuffin of eventually we're going to get to that. Whereas this feels more just, I kind of want to escape the situation that I'm in, and then just go from there. So it doesn't really necessarily have a plot that I would describe to people. I think there's a pitch. It has a pitch, like, there's this, Lord character of this planet who escapes and gets put into a bunch of bad situations. And you just kind of have to trust that the writing is good, or that the recommendation from the person is good to want to read it, because I don't think the plot, and there isn't really a plot. It's just kind of a pitch of what it is. And that doesn't mean it's bad. That just means it's not really, act 1, act 2, act 3 kind of going through the typical, heroes rise and fall, rising action, all that stuff. I mean, you have dips and ebbs and flows, but plot wise, there's not really like a string to follow, I feel like.
And I would make that same complaint about Name of the Wind. Yeah. After I read it, but I do appreciate that there is that direction that he's gonna have that revenge. I assume. I guess the third book hasn't come out, right?
The seventh book is the last one.
No, for
Name of the Wind. Yeah. It'll never come out probably.
But what he does in this series is he has his main character, Hadrian. Yeah. Hadrian. As the narrator. Yep. Having lived his entire life and now reflecting on everything that he's done. Yeah. And so right away we know we have these good sense of what has transpired. Yeah. And he's writing it as if we're living in this future world that he lives in, and that we're his audience. And so we know something about him. We've read about him in history books or things like that. And this is what really happened. Yep. He's setting the record straight, which whenever a story is done that way, it allows for some really interesting dramatic irony. And so throughout, he's making choices and he's narrating things like, if reader, I had known that this was the first step down a road that would lead to the entire annihilation of a world, right, or things like that, maybe I would have chosen differently. It's like, oh, okay. And that can sound very melodramatic. It sounds soap opera.
Yeah.
But I think he does a good job in his prose
Yeah.
of being genuine in that. And it's very clear from the beginning. That's the sort of story this is. If you just accept that, it is, I think, good. I think it's good prose. I think it's a good narrative. And because the story is lacking that through line for just this novel, this works as that thing that tells you where this is all going.
Yeah.
So without it, this would be a lower quality book, which is interesting because when I first started reading it, I was annoyed by that. I was like, okay, I feel like this, in my mind, I was thinking already, this would be more interesting if I didn't know where Hadrian would end up. If I didn't know that he was going to be this incredible influencer of the entire galaxy.
Yeah.
And instead just knew him as he was at the beginning of the story. But it works. I think it was the right choice, especially if this was all the story was going to be in this first installation. So how do you say his last name?
Marlowe?
No.
Oh, Ruocchio.
Ruocchio? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I would have pronounced
Chris
that wrong.
Ruocchio. I had pronounced it wrong until I saw an interview. But,
yeah. I think Ruocchio made the right choice.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you touched on prose. I think that's something to bring up because I think that's probably the strongest point, in my opinion, of the whole book. Characters are fine. Hadrian is the most fleshed out of all the characters. You have a few that kind of stand on their own and seem like they're a unique, interesting, memorable character, but it's hard to know because, without getting into spoilers, like Levi said, it's written from the perspective, and you get this right away in the very beginning of the book, that he's at the end of all of his conquests, of all of his adventures, he's writing this story, retelling the story after everything has happened. And so it's almost in some ways hard to believe that all these characters are going to exist through the whole duration of his lifespan. And so maybe in some ways you don't care as much because they're not going to last. And we do see some characters die in this book that are characters that he interacts with in pivotal ways. And so then that maybe even makes me think, okay, well, I don't need to be that invested maybe in some of these characters. But the prose, the language is kind of maybe a character in and of itself, how he views the world, his melodramatic nature, because he mentions that himself. Oh, this is like a drama that I'm watching or that I'm, putting myself into because I can't help but being dramatic. And he's, an actor on the stage and Shakespearean and that sort of thing. And I enjoyed the prose. I think it lends to the pace very well. It keeps things moving. And for the most part, the word choices are very, very good. And I would recommend the book on the prose alone, I think.
I could agree with that. I do think, like I said, if you accept it right away for what it is, as far as, leaning into that kind of dramatic side, which obviously, if you were actually a person who destroyed an entire world, I believe he hints at the fact that he destroys this entire species of alien. And that's not even a spoiler. You'll read that in the first chapter when he's talking about all the names that people know him by.
Yeah.
It makes sense that he would be that dramatic, that he would say things like, oh, if only I had known this was the first step down a road that would lead me to being the greatest villain our world has ever seen in all human history. It's like, well, I guess you're not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah.
So, if you accept that, then the prose is really good, and it's full of life in that way.
Yeah.
Hadrian, who he is very clear just from his writing alone, and of course his actions and the way he talks, and it all really does fit together. And that's interesting. And he has flaws too, which is good to see from a first person perspective. I think that was another complaint about Name of the Wind.
Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't feel like a Mary Sue, or a Gary Stu, however you want to genderize it, but which I think Terry Brew. I've never heard that one, but yeah, people would say, okay, Quoth from Name of the Wind. And I hate to just keep bashing on the comparisons, but that's, I think, what a lot of people would see is, it's this first person perspective narrative. We have this character who is after they've done everything and now they're retelling their story. And so the comparisons seem like they would make sense. We're in the modern fantasy science fiction era for both of these stories. But a lot of complaints for Name of the Wind were, Quoth, he can just kind of do anything. He learns everything really quickly. He's the youngest person to do this or that. And some people's maybe rebuttal to that would be, but is that actually true? He's kind of this, mythical character, this musician. He's telling story. He's a storyteller. So how much do we believe all of that stuff? Is it just kind of him inflating what actually happened? The unreliable narrator kind of trope. And this one, he does make mistakes, and you feel like his pride or his his where he came from, those things can sometimes get in the way of the stuff that he needs to do. And so I do think he's not just a Gary Stu who makes no mistakes, who's perfect at everything. He gets beat up, he loses, he has issues, he gets people hurt that he's close to, and so those things make the story more realistic, I would say. I think.
And where he is the best, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Because he's the son of a lord, and he would have that training and things like that. Berry blue, maybe.
Berry blue.
Blueberry.
Mm-hmm. Blueberries. Setting. What are your thoughts on the setting? It's this is probably maybe the last little bit that we'll touch on before we get into spoilers.
It's the galaxy. As somebody who reads a lot of sci-fi, I do appreciate that there's this sense that their place in the galaxy is very limited. They're not just developed faster than light travel. Now every sun is available, every star. There's this idea that I think at one point he calls it like a spider web, kind of reaching out thin little lines from one star to the other, and a lot of stars are still unknown to them, and hard to get to, and that sort of thing. And so this idea that even now it feels like they have a very tiny bit of the galaxy makes sense when you actually understand what it would take for us to colonize the entire galaxy. That this would be, even a couple millennia from now, we would still just be starting out. Obviously it compounds, but so from a sci-fi perspective, I appreciate there's a lot of thought behind this. It's not just, okay, I want to do Star Wars, everybody lives on planets, here's your snow planet, here's your desert planet.
Right.
There's thought into what that looks like. And it's the same when he goes to a new planet, that even because the atmosphere is slightly thicker or less thick, the way he breathes is more challenging or less challenging, the gravity, all those things.
Yep.
And he doesn't go into it like you might expect from like The Martian.
Right.
But he does reference it in a way that you would expect from people who are that's just the world they live in. That's just how they experience things. They don't really know much more about it. They're not great scientists or botanists, but they're experiencing it. They're experiencing that it's harder to breathe. It's like they're breathing in water, and it's harder to walk because gravity's harder, or they can't even go down to a planet because of the gravity.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it's a good balance in this is, in a way, hard sci-fi. And where it's not hard sci-fi, he just doesn't go into it. I do believe they are traveling faster than the speed of light. I wasn't sure about that. I think I looked it up. But only so much faster. So they still need to go into, what do they call it? Fugue.
Fugue, like a cryo sleep sort of type thing.
Yeah.
I agree with pretty much all that. I think the setting is interesting. It's not the most compelling part of the book for me. I do like that he doesn't go into detail on everything. And I've said this before on the channel. I don't want to see all the intricate science behind things. And maybe some people do, and they get annoyed
like
that
The Martian.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a credit to this. I'm okay with, and I actually prefer kind of a soft explanation for some of these things. And I think too, for a character who wouldn't necessarily know all the science, I think that's where the other elements of realism come in. This is a character who's a lord. He he's the son of these palatines. He wouldn't necessarily, he would just know that things work, and so I can send a message across the galaxy. I don't need to know all the science behind why I can do that. Whereas a character who's maybe more of on the science side of things would know, and then seeing it from their point of view, we should understand as well as the readers. So I think he does that well. But the setting, it's not to say it's derivative, but it's kind of stock science fiction with a blend of fantasy. Has some like medieval elements to it. The way that they have the hierarchy of planets and governors and all those. Everybody who lives and operates in the system are somewhat medieval in a way, and it makes an interesting world. It's not just because it's maybe we would say been done before doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's something that we can relate to, And so that I think it works in that sense.
Yeah, and he's writing with this. I think there's a confidence to it that tells you that he's not just choosing to make it an empire and making it lords and having a peasant class and having limitations on technology, just because that's the thing to do, and that's but that there's a reason to it, and there's going to be payoff to that. And you see that in this book. There's a character who's outside the empire, and so there's a totally different experience of technology and what it means to have rulers and who gets to choose what. And that makes her a completely different future human from him. And I think that's really interesting. I think that shows that yes, he's like we've already talked about how it's similar to Name of the Wind in the narrative perspective and the sort of story that's being told. And it's definitely similar to Dune. When you handed me the book, you said that the first like bit of it is Dune and the rest of it is Name of the Wind.
Yeah.
And I definitely see what you meant by that. And there's even things that are just like, he's not even trying to find a way to make it different right off the start, because like there's the shields that make it make guns irrelevant, make bullets irrelevant, and so they use swords sometimes. That's very much from Dune, and there are elements to that are very different than Dune, but you don't see those until later because he's sticking to this narrative that you live in his world, so you're gonna know some of these things. He does have to explain all of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think having said all that, before we get to spoilers, if you haven't read this book yet, if you're looking for something to read, or if you've seen the hype about it, because the series I think is doing really well. He's got a lot of readers now.
New book coming out in November.
Yeah, so and that'll be the conclusion. So it'll be a complete book 1 through book 7 series. I think there's 2 novellas in between somewhere that have little 2 or 3 that just have like other side stories. But otherwise, this book will be the end of the series, and then he'll move on to something else.
So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
What people think. Maybe we'll start hearing about how, it's not worth it. Don't even read it.
Right, true.
Or there will be even a bigger push for people to read it.
Right, absolutely.
That tends to be what happens after conclusions like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so if you're looking forward to it, I would recommend it. I think it's great, fun, and I'm very optimistic for the series going forward, especially after finishing the book. In my mind, the ending was strong to lead me towards wanting to keep going.
Yeah, and I think I should say that the way that Ruocchio wrote it was very clear that this is just the first installment to this whole journey, telling him what actually happened.
Yeah.
If you're Hadrian and you're sitting down to write this, you're not thinking about making sure that the first installment stands on its own. So I appreciate that it's not like that criticism is more about me as a reader wanting books to be their own thing and to stand on their own. And this doesn't, but it also wasn't meant to by the author. It was meant to just be the first chapter in his story.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. All right, that's it for spoiler free. We'll dive into spoilers now.
Hadrian dies.
First chapter. It's an interesting. It's weird that he's on the cover.
Yeah. Is that him?
I don't know. I guess I
assume. Yeah.
I guess I assume, but he doesn't really. Does he even wear that in the book? So what? I mean,
those little lights too.
I don't know. Spoilers.
Empire Silence is the Forerunners.
Yeah, it is. I don't love the name,
except
Empire of Silence.
That would be for the book.
Yeah,
well, it's the quiet in the book, so I appreciate that.
But he used that line. It's just an Empire of Silence.
Oh,
when they're like in the catacombs or whatever, they're looking, and he realizes that it's this species that is dead, or like the what are they called?
The
quiet, yeah. And then he says, "Oh, this is just an Empire of Silence," and that got me a little bit. I was like, "Okay, all right, I see."
That's fine. It's whatever. I mean, the name is. We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
That I think titles should try to follow 3 rules. They should hit 2 of these 3 things. One is just be attractive. They should sound cool.
Yeah.
My example for this is always the Phantom Menace. Sounds really cool. The second thing is that they should make sense for the book, and ideally make sense for the book in two ways. I love it when a title makes sense before you pick up the book. When you hear just a synopsis or something, you're like, okay, I get it. And then after you finish it, you're like, oh, now I get it. That's really awesome when that can happen. But at least one way. This one, it's definitely Empire of Silence. Is that the empire that he lives is a part of? And at first you think maybe you're not really seeing how it's silent in any way. It seems very loud and very controlling. And then you get to the quiet and you're like, oh, I get it. This is the Empire of Silence. This is going to be important. So it almost does that. It almost has that double entendre. And then the last one, what was the last one? It should make sense for the book. It should be attractive. And I think maybe I had the double entendre thing. Oh yeah. I think it should be attractive. It should make sense when you just know the synopsis of the story. So it should tell you what the story is going to be about in some way. So if it's sci-fi, it should hint at it being sci-fi. If it's fantasy, this would work well for a fantasy novel too. It's pretty innocuous. Sun Eater sounds
Sun Eater is great.
So that works. That works really well for that purpose. So Sun Eater, book 1, Empire of Silence, works well in telling you that it's science fiction. So it hits that first mark. I think Sun Eater works for the attractive part. That's very original.
Yeah.
Those sound interesting words that make you think about something. Empire of Silence is very boring. It
generic.
Sounds like it could be anywhere. But it does have that double entendre thing. So
biggest, I mean, I don't know that I really got bored in any sections of this. I think once I realized, that he gets to Amesh, I think that's the name of the planet, the water planet. And he goes through being a slave or not a slave, but he goes through being a beggar, and he's with Kat, the other beggar girl. And then he decides to join the gladiators, the Myrmidons, and fight that way. A little part of me was like, okay, this is sort of derivative. This is kind of, he's going to fight his way up. He's going to get some kind of sponsor. He's going to change their minds about something. He's going to have a rebellion. There's going to be, it's going to be something like that. He's going to learn something. His skills from being a Palatine are going to help him in that way. And it flipped it a little bit because then he meets one of the Cielsen and is able to speak to the Cielsen a little bit. And then because of that, he's then captured by the governor of the planet. Basically, I forget the title, the Lord of the Planet.
The Planet Lord.
And is commissioned then to be his children's tutor. And so that was slightly different. And then he meets this lady who is she's like an anthropologist for aliens, kind of. She's an archaeologist and realizes, we're xenologist. Yeah. Realizes that they've got this ancient historical site that they're trying to, do studies on. And from there, the book kind of goes quickly towards the end. And you have this like Cielsen attack sort of. But the Myrmidon part, I mean, I guess it makes sense why it was there. I don't know. It was fine. I don't think I really lost interest anywhere because I think his prose just carried me through, and it was interesting what he was saying and how he was describing what was happening, even if what he was happening wasn't the most exciting thing.
Right. And because of the way he set it up, we understand that we're just seeing what happened to him throughout this. Right. He could have skipped. He could have said, I was stuck on Amesh for a long time. I was a beggar. I was all these things.
Yeah.
But here's where my choices led me to the next chapter of my life. And he could have skipped over that stuff. I think there's a part where he says, I thought, reader, of skipping this whole episode with Kat, but if I left it out, I would be leaving out a part of myself or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So
there's that sense of drama that he feels like, this, every little aspect was important and mattered, and leads to something else. And we talked about how like long. I think he says that he's like 1,500 years old or something by the time he's writing this down. I could be wrong on that number, but I thought somewhere he says something like that.
Yeah, he's very old.
Very old. And it's interesting that like these little characters, like, he needs to mention Kat. Is he really going to remember this woman after 1,500 years?
Yeah, we talked about that.
And the solution would be, well, either he just has this great memory and they really do mean a lot, or he goes into fugue sleep across the galaxy and it's really like 1,000 years, but he's really only like 50 years, Then maybe, you'd remember, because you haven't done that much interaction.
And he's genetically, he's not human.
Right.
He's a genetically altered human.
Yeah.
They have a word for homunculi.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah.
And so homunculi are completely different. Obviously, you've read the book. You wouldn't be watching this if you haven't.
True.
And they're just genetically altered beings
Yeah.
who are based on humans, but are changed to meet some sort of need.
Yeah.
And so the lords and their children are genetically altered to meet this need for a higher version of humanity. And so they live a lot longer and they're a lot taller than most other humans, and they're stronger and all this other stuff.
Yep.
And presumably they're smarter and their memory is nearly perfect, evidently.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having a memory like that. I would feel so exhausted just remembering this.
Yeah.
It would be basically like living through it again, which I wonder if that's what he's going for. But I had a problem with that. I always, with things like this, Name of the Wind, it's any book series, and I've read others, I can't think of them off the top of my head, that try to do this. I always think I could go all the way in and have things that obviously wouldn't be remembered, forgotten, leave those out, or, write it in the way of a history book or something like that, or just forget about this and do normal narration, whatever happened to just, all-knowing third person that always worked. Don't mess with perfect. That works.
First person, the thing about first person is that it just brings you into the character's mind,
Yeah.
and so Hadrian's going to be thinking things that he wouldn't say out loud, and so then the narrator would have to know their mind, I guess, and then have a lot of these, Hadrian thoughts, and so you can kind of maybe tighten things up a little bit. And I think of books like The Hunger Games, which are very, very tight, very sharp. There's very little fat in that story. And I think that's partly because of the narration style. Yeah, it's stuck in her mind. So it doesn't, there's no chance of and especially in a book like this that's set in such a vast world where you have all these characters, and he goes into fugue sleep for 13 years to get across the galaxy to where he spends the majority of this book. And then the reveal later on is that it's actually 35 years or something.
Yeah. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. And so 35 years is a long time for a lot of other things to happen. And so if we were third person, you could think, man, there's a lot of other stories that are happening that are interesting, like his brother back on the main planet, his dad, his mom, these other characters. There's just a lot that's going on. What happened to the people on the ship?
Yes.
But in some ways, to trim all that out, he just, going first person, it's like the story takes a little pause when he goes into fugue and stops when he wakes up from fugue.
Right.
And he's a beggar. And it's as much a mystery to him as it is to us. And I think that allows for it to, speed up, I guess.
Yeah. And I've already said that the choice for narration works the best for making sure we understand where this story is going.
Yeah.
It works really well for his writing style and leaning into the dramatic.
Yeah.
And revealing, like you said, Hadrian to us and who he really is and how he thinks. But when we think about this choice to put right in front of the reader the fact that this is somebody who is far removed from this time, at the very least, a normal lifespan removed from it, and remembering it in such detail, I always think that that's so unrealistic. I have to assume that he has some sort of perfect memory.
Yeah.
He can literally relive points in his life. Which he doesn't say directly if that's the case, but
right.
That's the only way that it puts that kind of gripe in my mind away from the story. But that's whatever. That's kind of nitpicky to go after that. Should we also talk about this review, this idea?
Yeah, I in finishing the book, I put up my rating on Goodreads, and I just browsed through the reviews quickly. And I saw a review from somebody. It's a 1-star review, and I just thought it was funny. And it's written comedically, obviously, but it also, I think, is real. I think the person genuinely didn't like this book. And I'll read a little bit of it here, and then we can talk about it. And it's on this, I'll just read it. It says, this is by, I'll start over. This is by a wide margin the single most derivative book I have ever read. Young Quoth Atreides grows up in a life of privilege and power, learning from his father's mentat. Yada, yada, yada. You get the idea of what they're trying to say. They reference these other books that it's like Dune, Name of the Wind, references Lewis McAllister Bujold's Ruocchio saga. I'm probably mispronouncing all those words.
Never heard of that one.
Maybe Saga is the only one I got. but it talks about the Orange Catholic Church. It talks about Tarbian, which is the town in Name of the Wind, I believe. And so it's like, okay, and then it has this selection, these excerpts from the book, and it compares like the sentences or the paragraphs, 2 sentences and paragraphs from these other stories. And some of them are very similar. I don't think that's Ruocchio plagiarizing. I think the coincidence is that in this type of story, and especially Name of the Wind, the kind of story that you're telling where the character is already established, is already this legendary hero, of course you're going to have these kind of things and you're telling it with that kind of tone. Yeah. And so for me, talking about derivative, I don't really know. I don't know that I really care. If I read Dune and I enjoyed it, and it's about this guy named Paul Atreides who is this, Kwisatz Haderach and all these other prophetic things and whatever, and there's spice, this planet, and there's this kind of the way that the planet is set up and the government and the Bene Gesserit and all that stuff. And then you have this book, and if I enjoy them both, is that a problem? I don't know. I think maybe he's inspired by Dune. I don't know. I don't really know that he's inspired by Name of the Wind that much. They're too contemporary.
They're too.
Name of the Wind came out this is 2018. I think Name of the Wind is like 2011 or something.
Right.
And so
he wrote this before 2016 because that's when he got the book deal for it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think
when you choose to write your story from this perspective, that you're going to end up writing some things that are similar, especially since they're both very important people who made very big changes to the world. And also, the funny thing is, there's one here that where it's talking about, like, where is it? The march of time, the rise and fall of nations, and Hadrian is writing about it with this idea of like, so much has happened, but you already know about all that. Mm-hmm. So let me just tell you about my story. And what's the main Quoth, right? Is writing. Man, what a terrible name.
You really don't like
a flashback to all the terrible names in that book. And
I remember the first time I read Name of the Wind as a teenager, I loved it. It was my favorite book. And then I read Wise Man's Fear when it came out, and I hated it. And then I haven't come back to them since. And they're both on my shelf.
This is turning into a Name of the Wind review.
I know it's not.
But my point in that is they do have very similar wording and phrasing in it, talking about the rise and fall of empires and all of history that came before. But Hadrian's point is that you already know all that, and so I'm not going to try to retell all the history. And Quoth's point is, I'm going to just, all of that is really important, but fine, I'll just act like I'm the first person who was ever created and start with me. And so they're both saying somewhat the same thing, but they're actually, when it reveals a bit about their character, it reveals two different things.
Yeah.
Quoth is very snarky and I'm better than you, and Hadrian's very dramatic.
Right.
And so anyways, I thought that was funny because they do sound similar, but actually they're saying different things.
Right.
The characters are.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and I do think they're different enough. And Quoth does have the sense of like, I'm the best now, and I will become the best later on. Whereas Hadrian has a sense of, I will become the best, but right now I'm nothing, and that's what I'm showing you.
Yeah.
Not that, as a peasant, as a beggar, as somebody who has nothing, I'm going to be the best. And I think that's some of the appeal for Name of the Wind is like, if you read it at the right age, as probably the right gender, it's really exciting because you can kind of insert yourself. You're like, I want to read about a character who does everything right and is the best ever, and is like the youngest person to ever get into this college and all this stuff. And so there's some kind of like comic book fantasy self-insert into that. This is maybe more realistic, where the character recognizes the dire situation that he's in. And doesn't think, I'm the only one who can get out of this. Of course I'm going to get out of this because I'm the greatest bard there ever was,
and that comes down to themes. And, one theme that I recognized in Empire Silence I thought was actually really good. And I'm listening to The Howling Dark right now. And I don't think that this theme. Actually, it does. It does. Now that I think about it, it does carry through. So it's not exclusive to the Empire of Silence, at least as far as I can tell. I will let you know.
Yeah.
But it's this theme of obedience, and it's said outright. His tutor has him repeat the 8 forms of obedience, I think it is. But that's good, because then throughout the rest of the book, you can think about that. You can remember that those were referenced, and think about how are those playing into the role here, especially since the entire book, Hadrian is trying to get out from under somebody's thumb. He's trying to get away from having to be obedient to somebody else. Versus his father and this other lord. He talks about when he becomes the tutor for this other lord's, this planetary lord's kids, that he was free when he was a beggar on the streets, and now he's a slave, even though he's living the posh life again.
Right.
And so there's this whole idea of like, he doesn't want to have to be obedient. He doesn't matter which one it is. None of them are good to him. But Hadrian, writing this years and years later, keeps saying things like, I wonder what would have happened if I had just decided to just, surrender to where my life was and who I was supposed to be obedient to. If I had just done what my father wanted me to do, if I had just married what's her face, maybe the world would have never suffered as greatly as it had.
Right.
All that idea. And that's really interesting. But that's dramatic irony just constantly through the book.
Yep. I think the next thing to maybe hit on in our spoilers section of things before we wrap up the video, the Cielcen is kind of like the big mystery and maybe that's kind of the through line, is this mystery of who the Cielcen are. He's talking about them at the very beginning. They're these alien monster beasts that have language. He's very interested in language. That's kind of a through line throughout the whole story. And so his trying to figure out what they are and wishing that he could have some kind of conference with them, which he does get at the end of the book. Maybe that's kind of like the point of this, is like he's just interacting
pre-meeting and the meeting, and then everything else is post after he's finally met them. I found them to be interesting enough. I think the part that's really interesting to me is when he gets, and the story is the most interesting at the very end, when they realize that there's like this forerunner species, the Quiet, who have, the whole time, and I feel like this is a common thing in science fiction, there's this set line of reality that all the characters believe and all the characters fall into, and then something twists in the story, and you go, oh, I didn't realize this, and nobody could have realized this. It was secret. It was kept from us. And there was an organization that kind of withholds this information. And in this story, we are the first species to travel beyond the stars. There's other aliens. We found other planets with other aliens, other living life, other organisms, but none of them have traveled. None of them have left their planets except the Cielcen. And so that's the thing that really makes the Cielcen stand out. And then you realize, oh, we're not even the first species. There's another species who went and put all these historic sites on all these other planets because they all have something in common. That was really interesting to me. And of course, again, like I said, it was this kind of trope of revealing information that kind of upheaves the whole world. But it's such a big, broad thing that I thought it was okay. And he sets it up, the religion in the book, which is kind of dumb, because I don't know why people would worship a planet, especially one that failed them, But the idea of Earth, I guess, is what it is.
Right.
Whatever. The whole religion is based on this idea that Earth sent them out and is giving them the galaxy. At least that's kind of my understanding of it.
Yeah.
And so the idea that somebody else got to it first would totally clash with that.
Yeah.
And it talks about that. Oh man, the Chantry must know about this, and they're keeping it quiet because it totally ruins the religion.
Yeah.
That's all set up, and so it works. What exists in this story already is fighting against this idea that there would be these people before them.
Yeah.
And we have a character who represents humanity that can't accept that. This Volca, is that her name? Volca?
Yeah, something like that.
The xenologist.
Yeah.
She comes from outside the Empire, from a different group of people. I forget what they're called. Too. Lots of different groups of people.
The Extrasolarians?
No, but she's not an extra. Isn't she like a Norman or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Anyways, she is perfectly willing to accept that because they don't have that religion.
Right.
And at least she's not a part of it. So all these things kind of set up for that. but it is a forerunner species. It's not, quite the same, at least not yet.
Yeah.
There is this really interesting idea that the aliens, the other aliens, what are they
The
called?
Cielson.
Cielson. I keep wanting to call them the Sicilians. The Cielson, that they are somehow have gotten hold of this forerunner technology, and they didn't actually make any of the spaceships that they're using, and they're trying to find their the original creators, and they worship them as gods.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. It's very similar to Halo in that way. The idea. I think that's what the Covenant's all about, right? They found these halos and they create a religion around it. It seems like the Sicilians are doing the same thing, and so it's all of it's very interesting. The Empire of the Solons, or whatever they're called. All of this, the journey, the writing about all of this after he's already done all these things, but it's none of it is anything that's been done, hasn't been done before. But it is new that it's all put like this. That we have Dune mixed with this with that, and it's all being done in a different way.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think at the beginning of this, or at least I said to you, it seems like he read all of those books, or a lot of books like them, and he said, but what if it was this way instead? What if the author had chosen to go this way with it, or thought of it like this?
Yeah.
So he's bringing his own originality to it, and I think it is going to be interesting where it goes. And when I was looking at, this one was released in 2018. It's 2025. The last one's being released.
Yeah.
At least he's consistent. He's actually writing the books.
It's true.
So
yeah, no, and he's pumping them out. I mean, it's not several years between. It's in some instances, one book, the next year.
Yeah, these
which
two
is
were
really nice.
released one after the other in the same year. Ashes of Man and Kingdom of Death.
Yeah, which is really impressive. It's good output. And I mean, we'll see what the quality is like. Maybe we'll get there and go, oh yeah, we see why.
Yeah,
we see why this is the same year. But I don't foresee that.
If they're the same quality as this, and I've heard they got better.
Yeah.
Then it should be fine. Especially since the story is taking so long. It's not, like I said, it's now each book is its own story, and it's more about the prose and just the journey.
Yeah.
I imagine that they are the same quality.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one last thing I'd like to touch on. I think the most excited that I was for this story was at the very end, when he finally found a way to get out of the situation on the planet, and was able to kind of get his ship, go on this adventure. He talks about adventuring the whole book. He talks about these other, legendary adventurers who go and explore and have all these interactions. And he finally now gets to have the chance to do that. And so it really made me excited to read book 2, more than maybe other books have made me want to read the second book, just because I felt, okay, now we're going somewhere. Now we have motion. He's going to find this pirate planet. He's going to find this adventure. He's bringing the group together that he had in the Myrmidons, which I don't really care for any of them. That wasn't exciting for me, but it was just, I understand what he was doing, and maybe it'll get more interesting later on. But I just thought, okay, now we have motion. We're going towards something. He has this goal of finding this thing,
right?
And we're going to explore more of the galaxy. So for me, that was the most exciting part, getting to the end and realizing, okay, we're setting up for an adventure.
So the most exciting part was the end of the book.
Yes, was preparing for book 2.
I thought when he started going to the site of the Quiet Temple or whatever, that's when it got really interesting for me. I mean, again, the whole time it's well written, and it's consistent, and it's
well paced.
Yeah, it's interesting, and even though it is very similar to other things that you may have read or know about, it doesn't take away from its own unique charm. One review says that it's the most genuine sci-fi can get. I'm not sure if that's true. I think maybe Star Wars is the most genuine sci-fi can get.
But it's kind of science fantasy, though.
Yeah, you're right. That's more fantasy. Yeah. But I do agree that it's there is a sense that it's not hard to just enjoy the journey, even if it does feel like some parts of it aren't necessary. From our perspective. But yeah, I really like when it gets to the xenologist side of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was great as well. And yeah, I think if you're treating this as a standalone book, maybe not that unique, but we'll have to judge the whole series on a whole, I think. Which seems kind of just the way that modern science fiction fantasy is nowadays. It's the whole series as a collection of stories, as a just volumes in a singular tale, rather than just one individual book at a time.
And maybe we'll get to the end and we'll think this could have all been one book,
maybe.
books,
I will say so far, I mean, looking at my bookshelf, you can see the subsequent books up there, and then you can see the Brandon Sanderson books down here. And again, we're talking about one perspective, and so that narrows it down a lot. If you took out all of the characters except for Kaladin from these books, it would be a lot shorter of a book. But they still are smaller, and not that small is the best thing. And you can have long books that are interesting, but I just think it's something. There's not a lot of bloat in this book, and it's very interesting to see the rest of the books don't also have a whole lot of bloat. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. You've already started on Howling Dark. You're like halfway through ish.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, and so I have yet to start, but we plan to do another review of that when we're done, and then just keep going through the series as long as it holds us entertained, and get to where book 7 comes out in November. So anything else?
Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah. If you've read it, if you're looking forward to reading it, if it's derivative, if it's not derivative.
Yeah. Write an autobiography of your entire life to let us know your thoughts.
Yeah.
And put it in 7 volumes and publish it, and we'll read it and let you know what we think.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.